Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. I'm your host, Rick the Barkeep, bringing you episode 152 here at the tavern, presented by HeroTaku.com. What is Time Force? It's a legitimate question I have, one that I don't think really has an answer. It's a simple question, but unfortunately, in Power Rangers, 99% of the time, when you have a very simple question about something, you're not going to get an answer because the writers don't ever come up with an answer. And if you question the validity of that statement, just go back to my previous video when I talked about Dino Charge and the things they are not answering in that series. But I digress. Alright, but I want to talk about Time Force today. Not the Rangers themselves, not the show specifically, but I want to talk about the Time Force Police, the organization that Jen, Trip, Lucas, Katie, Alex, Captain Logan, Circuit, all those people work for. Because when you start examining what Time Force is doing, what equipment they have at their disposal, and everything else just associated with them, it really just doesn't make a lot of sense. So, I want to talk to you guys about the issues that I have with Time Force and just the things that are just befuddling when you think about them. Now, I do like Power Rangers Time Force. I think it's a good series. I think it's overhyped sometimes, but it's still good. I like it. I have no real issues with it, except the ones I'm going to go over to you guys about Time Force itself. Now, I think where the problem begins is ill defining your terms or not defining your terms. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, Power Rangers Time Force, to the best of my knowledge, is not so much a carbon copy, but is very similar to its Sentai counterpart, Time Ranger. Not in the same way that Samurai was, but they are very closely linked. Now, I have not seen Time Ranger at all, outside of its awesome opening, which you guys should download on iTunes. That's a very great opening song. That's kind of the extent I have to it. But I did do some research on it. And based on what I was able to find in the Ranger Wiki and a couple of other Google searches, it is rather telling because they seem to want to do the same thing in Power Rangers that they did in Time Force, but they didn't define it properly. And what do I mean by that? Well, according to my research, the Time Force equivalent in Time Ranger is known as the Time Protection Department. And due to events caused by paradoxes and whatnot, this organization was developed to prevent unauthorized time travel. Now, that's already a great science fiction concept there because we have in so many different science fiction universes that time travel is something that happens, and if certain people get a hold of time travel, it causes so many bad issues. Just as a brief example, look at the Star Trek universe. We had, the whole thing with the Cold War, the temporal Cold War in Enterprise, where we did have agents like Daniels going back in time to manipulate and stop certain events instigated by Future Guy, the Suliban, the Zindi, the Sphere Builders, all that stuff. Okay, but that's beside the point. The point is that in Star Trek there is an organization that works with time travel to prevent it. They have temporal affairs like we saw in Trials and Tribulations. They have time ships like in Relativity and Future's End. There's somebody from the Federation that is patrolling the space-time continuum to prevent unauthorized time travel and try to keep the timeline free of errors, basically. And from what I can gather, the Time Protection Department is the same way over in Time Ranger. That the whole impetus for that series is that a villain gang wants to go back in time to manipulate the past, and Time Protection Department follows them, and then we get our series with Time Ranger. Now, over in Power Rangers, it's not really that simple because they brought the concept of a criminal gang going back in time to manipulate things and being pursued by the Time Force police, but we're dealing with an organization that doesn't really deal with time travel. Okay, let's look at this for a second. The opening narration to the first episode states that the city has been cleaned of all crime thanks to the efforts of the Time Force Police Department. Okay, so off the bat, we're already established that our organization is a police force. Now, when was the last time you saw the LAPD with a DeLorean? I mean, one that can travel back in time, of course. When I think of people who are preventing time travel from happening, I don't necessarily think of police officers, particularly ones that are often corrupt. And of course, we have hundreds of stories of corrupt police officers around the United States all the time. So I find that curious that they brought the concept of a department that prevents time travel or investigates into it, and they're able to basically give it to a local precinct, is what it sounds like. Um, because we don't even know what Time Force's jurisdiction is. Is it this one city? Is it the entire Earth? They seem to also be judge, jury, and executioner simply because it is the Time Force logo that is over the tribunal's heads at Rancic's trial, which seems to me like it's more of a government than it is a police force. I just don't particularly get that. But the series doesn't particularly define that. They say, hey, we gotta put this logo here because it's the police's logo. But again, when you go see the Hall of Justice or whatever, do you actually see the police's logo behind the judge or something? That's getting a little off topic, but you guys get the point that I'm trying to make there. Okay, so they're a police force. But obviously, they're not a police force that utilizes time travel. And why do I say that? Well, look at Minority Report and Tom Cruise and what they did there, the time police did there, is that they were able to see crimes before they happen and stop them and prevent them. Now, there's no indication that Time Force is doing this because if that was the case, Rancic would have never traveled back in time in the first place. Keep in mind, they were able to rid the streets of all criminals except for Rancic. Why Rancic? The implication is that he is the most dangerous criminal, most powerful criminal out there. Okay, that I can buy. You can take down all the low-level street thugs, but it's hard to take out the Joker, it's hard to take out the Kingpin, it's hard to take out those guys. I get that. That makes a lot of sense. But if we were to assume that they are using, future sight or able to predict the future, then they should have been able to capture Rancic long ago. And even if they're not doing that, consider this. The opening episode has Rancic trying to go back in time using a time travel device. Possibly from Time Force itself. I don't think it's explicitly stated. But anyway, he tries to go back in time. Alex stops him. He goes to trial. He escapes, kills Alex, and then travels back in time anyway. Now, if Time Force actually had the ability to time travel properly at their disposal, then what Jen and the others should have done, instead of getting on a time ship and going back to pursue Rancic to the year 2001, then what they should have done is go back in time to before or when Alex kidnapped him, or when Alex captured him, and say, hey, we gotta look in the courtroom, Nadira's going to be there or something, or we need to transport him differently because it's going to be attacked or whatever. They don't do any of that. They just go back in time, which tells me that this organization by the name of Time Force does not utilize time travel in their daily routine. That time itself, temporal mechanics, whatever you want to call it, is not being utilized by them. It's in their name, but it's not something they regularly do. Because even look what they have to work with. Okay. They travel on motorcycles which have wheels. They travel in squad cars which have wheels. Where every other vehicle in this universe can fly or float. None of the Time Force vehicles do that. Even when they commandeer a vehicle later, it's actually floating, it has no wheels, and we see all these skyships flying around in the first episode. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Um, okay, so they don't have vehicles, and then they transport the criminal with four officers. The most dangerous criminal, the last one that they got, is being transported with only two escort vessels, which happen to be motorcycles. They don't seem to be very intelligent or very well equipped. Excuse me, because Rancic is able to make an aerial attack on the vehicle itself. With no backup. I don't get this. They're not a very well equipped police force. If they're doing this stuff, or at least they're making very bad decisions. But this is also the same organization that has morphers, DNA type technology, cryo freezing technology, holographic technology, and mind wiping technology, none of which is utilized properly. Because what do they do with the Time Rangers when they come back? They say it's procedure to wipe their memories of the past. First, why? And how often have you actually gone back in time? Because it doesn't seem like you actually use it. And if you're going to wipe somebody's minds, why not wipe the minds of the criminals, instead of freezing them? Why not wipe their minds? That's something else to go ahead and think of. Let's also consider that they have zords of their capability, which they would not normally need. Okay, so it's established that the monsters excuse me, the mutants can grow to giant size, so you might need those at some point. Um, but it's I just don't understand this organization where time is in their name, but time travel is something they rarely do. But apparently, it's not so rare that there isn't procedure for it. I mean, they have a giant walking robot that goes around the city whose sole purpose is to propel, by punching, a time machine into a gate. And it seems to be routine enough to where there's a siren on top of it, and flying cars know to get out of the way when this is happening, when it's really unnecessary, considering that if it's successful, they would go through and the cars on the other end would not be damaged, would not be affected in any way at all. So again, here's the question I have about Time Force: is that what are they and what do they do specifically? They fight crime. I get that. They have their own team of rangers, which they only had one ranger working at any given time. That doesn't make any sense. Which actually opens up a whole new bag of questions that you think of. Is like they have one ranger, or they have five morphers, but one ranger, and they lost another morpher in time because, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Consider this: we gotta stop crime in this city. What are we gonna do, Paul? I got an idea. Let's build a giant T Rex robot and let's send it back in time for some reason. I mean, really? I mean, again, just take all those take those ideas and apply them to a contemporary situation. Do you think the NYPD would sanction the creation of a giant Tyrannosaurus robot to patrol the streets of Manhattan? Just think about that for a second. Would they do that? Likely not. Then again, they don't have mutants to go ahead and fight. I don't know, guys. It's just, believe it or not, I'm really having trouble kind of articulating because I think I just said everything that needs to really be said. It seems what was happening is that they brought over the Time Protection Department, but they didn't look at the implications of what that means to Time Force. If Time Force was simply to prevent people from traveling back in time, that would make a little bit more sense because you got the jets that can go back in time, the portal that goes back in time, and you have a reason to get involved with the villains of that series. But the thing is that the whole involvement with Rancic is more serendipitous than anything, simply because he wants to go back in time, and he's not foiled by the Time Force police because they monitor the time continuum to prevent such things, but rather he's a criminal and the regular police just stopped him because they found out that he was held up in a building. Because if they did say, okay, this is Rancic, we know he's going to travel back in time, so now we're going to try and prevent him because according to historical records, this was his last known location. They never state that in the series whatsoever. It's just that we gotta stop Rancic, we gotta go after him. But again, they're not utilizing time travel to its logical advantage. And again, let's talk about what happens in the past because they really do sidestep a lot of the Time Force stuff because it does take place in what was the contemporary time, which was 2001. But here's something I want to ask about the time jets. The whole premise is that they are sent from the future into the past. For the Rangers to use them. When the Zords are damaged or they run low on their futuristic fuel, they are sent back to the year 3000 to be repaired and refueled. Okay, that makes sense. I get it. You don't have the necessary technology in 2001 to do that, so you have to send them into the past. Okay, I get that. So, uh, why is it that when when they do call them again, that it's not instantaneous that they show up. There is an episode, I can't recall the name of the episode off the top of my head, where the Zords get damaged, they go back, and they try to call them again to fight against the mutant, but they're not able to. I believe this is the episode probably where they introduced the time show. But Circuit specifically says, and again, it's not verbatim, but he basically says they need time to repair, which is the cardinal sin of any time travel show, is that you can't use the term no time or not enough time. You can't say that at all, because logically what should happen? They should go back to the future and then come back immediately a nanosecond after they left, and then we wouldn't have a conflict. But they don't do that. So, what type of time travel are they utilizing exactly? Because there's no time travel that I am aware of, whether it's a DeLorean or something Steve Urkel made, or anything that says you can't go back to the exact instant when you left. There's no rule against that. There's no time paradox or anything like that. And even when we get to the end of the series, where there's all those issues with the time crystals and the buildings being destroyed and all that junk, that still doesn't make a lot of sense, to be quite honest. One of the failures of Time Force overall, and again, every season has its failures. Let's make that clear. But I'm not trying to say the entire series is a failure. But one of the problems, let's put it that way, one of its problems that it has is the time travel aspect. And frankly, we were promised a lot from Time Force, but they did not deliver on it, because the whole series was supposed to be about time travel, not being stuck in one damn year. But yeah, it just doesn't make any sense about what Time Force is and what they're doing. Um, why wasn't the series established, again, as a time protection department, that their entire purpose was to prevent unauthorized time travel? I mean, that seems like a very simple concept. Why did it need to be changed into a police department that, oh, by the way, also has time travel available to it? That I just don't get that. Why? It's one of those translations that just doesn't make any sense. Like, again, why change it from Pegasus to Unicorn? Why change it from Qilin to Griffin? It makes absolutely no sense that you would go ahead and change it. I mean, it's not as bad as, changing a squid Zord into an octopus Zord. I mean, that's horrendous. That's just sheer stupidity. But this is just one of those things where they didn't really seem to think it through. Um, and I'd like to know where I want to know where they kind of got the idea of Time Force to begin with. Where did Time Force basically say we're a police department, but also we're going to work in time travel? Because that seems to be the jurisdiction of somebody completely different. Because again, under a police department, the Chicago Police Department, should they have access to time travel? Probably not. If they're chasing mutants in the future, I think you should stick to that. Uh, Heck, if you want to compare this to X-Men, I know a lot of people want to compare Time Force to X-Men. They have special departments within the government going after mutants. And I believe there are some comics and adaptations where there are special mutant units that are taken in to stop mutants, basically. But even if you use, that logic, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Saying that, hey, we're gonna go stop mutants, but we're also gonna be involved in time travel, because, again, that makes a lot of sense, does it? All right, I'm just rambling on because I think I've made my point. I really think I've made my point. And I think, to answer my own question, Time Force is a bad translation of its original Sentai counterpart, but then again, did you expect anything less? Now, I could be completely wrong about the Time Ranger thing, and maybe they did a few other things, but based on what I'm saying, they were a temporal prevention department, and I don't understand why that wasn't utilized over in Time Force itself. That you basically opened this big plot hole, and you didn't think about filling it at all. And it is really hard to do shows about time travel, anything without, because it's all theoretical and all that, but there are good ways of doing it, like Back to the Future, and then there are bad ways of doing it, like Turtles 3, basically. And Time Force, 9 times out of 10, really gets its time travel wrong, because, again, if they were doing logical time travel, or at least if I was Captain Logan, I would, continue to send the Zords back the instant that they leave, because that's another thing too, and this is the last point I want to follow up on, is that the series in both Time Force and Wild Force basically indicates that events in the past and the future are happening instantaneously from each other. Because you'll notice in Time Force when Wes and Eric contact contact Trip in the future, Trip basically says, here in the year 3001, we're doing this, but I didn't know that they were doing this in 2002. Basically saying that from where they left off, it's been a year, and the time frames are consistent. Why wasn't like 50 years after Jen and them went back to the future? Why wasn't it 10 years? Why wasn't it a week? Why is it exactly 1 year? Why are the chronometers synced up completely? And then, of course, I think the final question here is why was the Q-Rex Megazord being sent from the future by Time Force? That's the only explanation I have, is it comes from the future. I mean, that's what they did in Gokaiger. So why is Time Force sending another Tyrannosaurus Zord back in time to help the Rangers? And again, that's if you don't subscribe to my Megaforce is a lie theory. All right, I think again, I think I've made my point. There isn't too much else to talk about this topic. If I left something out, please bring it up in the comments and let me know about it. But I do want to know what your all's thoughts on this. It doesn't really ruin the series for me, but it could have been made so much better if they could actually explain things. And that's the truth about any Power Rangers season. If they can actually explain things, the series just would overall be better. All right, then. So leave your comments below. Let me know what you guys think of this topic. And, well, I want to thank you guys for listening. Have a good evening. And the tavern is now closed.